The morning rush at Riverside Café was in full swing when Commander Jake Harrison walked through the glass doors. His navy dress uniform crisp against the backdrop of chattering customers and the gentle hum of espresso machines. What he didn't know was that the quiet barista behind the counter, the one with tired eyes and flour-dusted apron who'd been serving him black coffee for 3 months, was about to shatter everything he thought he knew about ordinary people living ordinary lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Ava Sinclair wiped down the marble countertop for the 4th time that morning, her movements precise and economical in a way that most customers never noticed. To them, she was just another 20-something working the early shift at Seattle's busiest coffee shop, probably saving up for college or paying off student loans like half the city's young workforce. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup beyond basic concealer to hide the faint scar that ran along her left temple, a mark she always explained away as a childhood accident involving a bicycle and poor judgment. The cafe itself sat on the corner of Pine Street and Harbor Avenue, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a perfect view of Elliott Bay and the constant stream of naval personnel who made their way to and from the nearby Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. Riverside Café had become an unofficial gathering spot for off-duty sailors, Marines, and the occasional officer who preferred civilian coffee to the industrial-strength brew served on base. The owner, an elderly man named Frank Delacroix, had deliberately cultivated this atmosphere, covering the exposed brick walls with vintage maritime photographs and naval memorabilia that made service members feel welcome. Ava had been working at Riverside for exactly 4 months and 2 days, though if anyone had asked her supervisor, Carla Montenegro, they would have learned that Ava was the most reliable employee they'd ever hired. She arrived precisely 15 minutes before her 5:30 a.m. shift, never called in sick, never complained about difficult customers, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to remember complex drink orders after hearing them just once. What Carla didn't know, what nobody in Seattle knew, was that Ava's remarkable memory had been honed through years of memorizing mission briefings, personnel files, and tactical information that could mean the difference between life and death in hostile territory. The coffee shop's morning routine played out with clockwork precision around her. Business people in expensive suits grabbed their usual orders and rushed toward the downtown financial district. University students from nearby Seattle Pacific settled into corner booths with textbooks and laptops, caffeinating themselves for another day of lectures and seminars. Local residents wandered in wearing jogging clothes and weekend casual attire, treating Riverside as their neighborhood living room, where everyone knew each other's names and preferred beverages. But it was the military customers who interested Ava most, though she was careful never to let that interest show. She observed them with the trained eye of someone who had spent years analyzing behavioral patterns and assessing potential threats and allies. The young enlisted personnel were easy to spot, eager, nervous energy, still adjusting to civilian interactions after months aboard ships or at training facilities. The seasoned non-commissioned officers carried themselves with quiet confidence earned through experience and responsibility. And then there were the officers like Commander Harrison, who possessed a different kind of authority altogether. Commander Jake Harrison had first walked into Riverside Café on a Tuesday morning in late January, and Ava had immediately cataloged everything about him. Mid-30s, approximately 6'2", maintained the bearing of someone accustomed to command even in civilian clothes. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, paid with exact change, and always left a reasonable but not excessive tip. More importantly, he treated service staff with respect, a detail that told Ava more about his character than any uniform or rank insignia could convey. What made Commander Harrison particularly interesting to Ava wasn't his obvious leadership qualities or even his distinguished service record, though she had researched both through channels that would have surprised him. It was the way he observed his surroundings with the same careful attention that she did, suggesting experiences that went beyond typical naval operations. There was something in his eyes that spoke of decisions made under pressure, of responsibility for other people's lives, of situations where failure wasn't just disappointing but potentially catastrophic. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Over the past 3 months, their interactions had settled into a comfortable routine. Commander Harrison would enter at precisely 7:15 a.m., order his black coffee, and often spend a few minutes making polite conversation about the weather or current events while Ava prepared his drink. She had learned that he was stationed at the shipyard temporarily, overseeing some kind of training program that he couldn't discuss in detail. He had mentioned having served overseas, but always changed the subject when customers showed too much curiosity about his experiences. For her part, Ava had constructed a believable backstory that satisfied casual inquiry without inviting deeper investigation. She was from a small town in Oregon, had moved to Seattle for a fresh start after a difficult breakup, and was considering going back to school, but hadn't decided on a major yet. The story was simple, sympathetic, and forgettable, exactly what she needed it to be. Nobody questioned why someone with her obvious intelligence and organizational skills was content serving coffee, because everyone in Seattle seemed to know someone who was overqualified for their current job while figuring out their next move. The reality, of course, was far more complex. For the past 6 years, Ava had been Lieutenant Ava Sinclair, one of only 12 women to successfully complete the Navy's most classified Special Operations training program. She had conducted reconnaissance missions in 3 different countries, provided intelligence support for hostage rescue operations, and earned commendations that would never appear in any public record. Her specialty was deep cover intelligence gathering, the ability to disappear into civilian populations and extract information from targets who never suspected they were being monitored. But officially, none of that existed anymore. Her military service had been classified at levels that made it effectively invisible. Her identity had been carefully separated from all traceable records, and she had been given a new life with a clean background that could withstand casual scrutiny. To everyone at Riverside Café, including Commander Harrison, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a young woman working an honest job while trying to figure out her future. As Commander Harrison approached the counter that morning, Ava noticed something different in his demeanor. There was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before, and his usual pleasant expression carried an undercurrent of concern that suggested something significant was weighing on his mind. She wondered if it had anything to do with the unusual amount of naval activity she had observed around the shipyard over the past week. But asking direct questions would have been completely out of character for someone in her supposed position. "Good morning, Commander," she said with the friendly but professional tone she had perfected over months of practice. "The usual black coffee?" "Actually," he replied, his voice carrying a slight edge of preoccupation, "make it a double-shot espresso today. It's going to be one of those mornings." As Ava began preparing his drink, she had no way of knowing that this would be the last normal conversation they would ever have. In less than 10 minutes, a simple accident involving spilled coffee and a chain that should have remained hidden would transform them both from strangers, sharing polite morning pleasantries, into 2 people whose paths had been destined to cross in ways that neither of them could have imagined. The espresso machine hissed softly as she worked, and outside the cafe windows, Seattle was waking up to what appeared to be just another ordinary day in an ordinary coffee shop where ordinary people went about their ordinary lives. But appearances, as both Ava and Commander Harrison would soon discover, could be devastatingly deceiving. Over the following weeks, Ava had carefully cultivated her identity as the reliable coffee shop worker who had become a familiar fixture in the daily routines of Riverside Café's regular customers. Her backstory was meticulously crafted and had been tested through dozens of casual conversations with curious patrons who wondered about the quiet young woman behind the counter. According to everyone who knew her, Ava Sinclair had grown up in the small coastal town of Brookings, Oregon, where her father worked as a commercial fisherman and her mother managed the local library. She had been an excellent student in high school, particularly strong in mathematics and science, but family financial constraints had made college impossible immediately after graduation. Instead, she had worked various jobs around Brookings, waitressing at the Harbor Diner, helping with bookkeeping at her uncle's auto repair shop, and even spending a summer working for the county parks department, maintaining hiking trails. The story explained her physical fitness, her comfort with early morning schedules, and her ability to handle demanding customers with patience that seemed beyond her apparent years. When pressed for details about her family, Ava would mention that her parents had divorced when she was 21, selling the family home and going their separate ways. Her father had moved to Alaska for better fishing opportunities, while her mother had relocated to Arizona for health reasons related to the damp Pacific Northwest climate. This fictional family dissolution provided perfect justification for why Ava had few visitors, rarely talked on her phone during breaks, and seemed to have no strong ties keeping her in any particular location. It also explained why she had decided to move to Seattle, far enough from Brookings to feel like a fresh start, but familiar enough that she wouldn't seem out of place among the city's transplant population. Her romantic history, according to the carefully constructed narrative, centered around a long-term relationship with a young man named Tyler who had worked at the local lumber mill. They had been together through high school and into their early 20s, making plans to eventually marry and settle down in Brookings like their parents before them. But Tyler had gradually developed a drinking problem that Ava couldn't overlook, leading to arguments, broken promises, and finally a painful breakup that had motivated her decision to leave Oregon entirely. The story resonated with many of Riverside Café's customers because it felt authentic and relatable. Everyone in Seattle seemed to know someone who had escaped a small town and a relationship that wasn't working, seeking opportunities and experiences that weren't available in rural communities. Ava's supposed journey from Brookings to Seattle represented a familiar narrative of personal growth and independence that required no further explanation. Work history appeared equally straightforward and believable. She had arrived in Seattle 8 months ago, initially staying in a budget hostel while looking for both employment and permanent housing. After 2 weeks of job searching, she had found work at a chain restaurant in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, but the late-night hours and rowdy atmosphere hadn't suited her personality. When a position opened at Riverside Café, she had immediately applied, appreciating both the early morning schedule and the more professional clientele. Frank Delacreone, the cafe owner, had been impressed by her references from Oregon employers and her obvious competence during the interview process. She demonstrated perfect coffee preparation techniques, handled the point-of-sale system like someone who had worked retail before, and showed an intuitive understanding of customer service that couldn't be taught. More importantly, she seemed genuinely interested in the job rather than treating it as a temporary placeholder while pursuing other opportunities. Her supervisor, Carla Montenegro, had quickly recognized Ava as the most dependable employee on the morning shift. Unlike many coffee shop workers who viewed their jobs as stepping stones to something better, Ava approached her responsibilities with a level of professionalism that impressed both management and customers. She never arrived late, never left early, and had volunteered to work every holiday shift since being hired. The apartment where Ava lived further reinforced her carefully constructed identity. Located in the Fremont neighborhood, it was a modest one-bedroom unit in a converted 1920s house that had been divided into 4 separate apartments. The rent was reasonable by Seattle standards. The other tenants were quiet professionals who minded their own business, and the location provided easy access to both Riverside Café and the various activities that a young transplant might pursue in her free time. Her neighbors knew her as a polite but private person who kept regular hours, never threw parties, and occasionally could be heard playing acoustic guitar in the evenings. She had mentioned to Mrs. Chun, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment below, that she was teaching herself to play using online tutorials, another detail that fitted perfectly with the image of someone rebuilding her life after a difficult period. The few personal possessions visible in her apartment told a consistent story. Photographs on her bookshelf showed a younger version of herself with people who could plausibly be family members and friends from Oregon. The books ranged from popular fiction to self-help titles about career development and personal growth. Her kitchen contained the basics that someone on a coffee shop salary would reasonably own, and her closet held the wardrobe of someone who dressed for comfort and practicality rather than fashion or professional advancement. Even her recreational activities supported the established narrative. She had joined a hiking group that met on weekends, explaining her interest in outdoor activities as something she had developed growing up near the Oregon coast. She occasionally attended lectures at the Seattle Public Library, telling fellow hikers that she was considering returning to school but hadn't decided on a field of study. She had also begun taking a pottery class at a community center, describing it as a stress relief activity that helped her unwind after busy mornings at the cafe. Her financial situation appeared equally authentic and unremarkable. She maintained a checking account at a local credit union, paid her bills on time, and lived within her means without any obvious sources of income beyond her coffee shop wages. Her credit history showed the profile of someone who was responsible but not wealthy, a few small debts that were being paid down steadily, no major purchases or investments, and the kind of modest financial footprint that belonged to someone building their adult life one paycheck at a time. Medical records associated with her current identity reflected routine health care appropriate for a healthy young woman with no significant medical history. A physical examination when she first moved to Seattle had found her to be in excellent health, with only minor scars and marks that were consistent with an active outdoor lifestyle. The doctor had noted her exceptional physical fitness but attributed it to her supposed background of hiking and physical labor in Oregon. Every aspect of Ava Sinclair's identity had been designed to withstand casual scrutiny while discouraging deeper investigation. She was interesting enough to be memorable, but not so remarkable that people felt compelled to ask probing questions. Her background was detailed enough to satisfy normal curiosity, but simple enough that she could discuss it without fear of contradicting herself or revealing information that didn't exist. The persona was so convincing that even Ava sometimes found herself slipping into the mindset of the woman she was pretending to be. After months of maintaining the facade, the rhythms of coffee shop life had become genuinely comfortable, and the relationship she had built with regular customers felt surprisingly authentic despite being founded on carefully constructed lies. But beneath this meticulously crafted identity lay a reality that would have stunned everyone who thought they knew the quiet barista from Oregon. Everything about Ava Sinclair's supposed background was an elaborate fiction designed to hide a truth that was far more extraordinary and far more dangerous than anyone at Riverside Café could have imagined. The truth about Ava Sinclair was buried in classified files that existed in only 3 locations worldwide, accessible to fewer than 20 people who possessed the necessary security clearances and operational need to know. Her real story began not in the fictional fishing town of Brookings, Oregon, but in the very real military compound of Fort Braxton, North Carolina, where she had reported for duty 6 years earlier as Lieutenant Ava Sinclair, United States Navy. At 19, fresh from completing an accelerated computer science degree at MIT with a specialty in cybersecurity and digital forensics, Ava had been recruited directly into one of the Navy's most classified programs. The Deep Water Initiative was so secret that it didn't officially exist, operating under a series of administrative covers that made it invisible to congressional oversight and public scrutiny. Only a handful of senior military officials and select intelligence agency directors knew about the program's true purpose: training operatives who could disappear completely into civilian populations while conducting long-term intelligence operations. Ava's recruitment had been anything but accidental. Military talent scouts had been monitoring her academic performance since her sophomore year at MIT, particularly her groundbreaking research into cryptocurrency tracking and her development of algorithms that could identify hidden patterns in seemingly random data streams. But what had really caught their attention was her psychological profile, a rare combination of exceptional analytical intelligence, emotional stability under pressure, and the kind of adaptable personality that could maintain deep cover identities for extended periods. The selection process for deep water had been brutal beyond anything described in conventional military training manuals. Of the 43 candidates who began the program alongside Ava, only 7 had completed the full training cycle. The others had been eliminated through a combination of psychological testing, physical challenges that pushed human endurance to its limits, and simulated missions that revealed fatal flaws in judgment, composure, or operational security. Ava's training had encompassed skills that went far beyond traditional military education. She had learned to speak Mandarin, Arabic, and Russian with native-level fluency. She had mastered advanced hand-to-hand combat techniques developed specifically for situations where conventional weapons weren't available or appropriate. She had studied acting methods used by professional performers, learning to inhabit fictional personas so completely that she could pass polygraph examinations while maintaining her cover identity. Most importantly, she had been trained in what the program called social engineering, the art of extracting information from targets who never realized they were being manipulated. This involved understanding human psychology at a level that bordered on manipulation, learning to read micro-expressions that revealed deception or concealed knowledge, and developing the patience to build relationships over months or years in pursuit of a single piece of critical intelligence. Her first operational assignment had taken her to Prague, where she had spent 18 months posing as an American graduate student researching Eastern European art history. Her actual mission involved monitoring a network of arms dealers who were selling advanced weapons technology to terrorist organizations. The identity she had constructed was so convincing that she had actually attended classes at Charles University, written academic papers that were published in legitimate journals, and maintained relationships with professors who never suspected that their promising student was documenting their conversations for intelligence analysis. The Prague operation had been a complete success, resulting in the arrest of 12 arms dealers and the seizure of weapons shipments that would have eventually reached 3 different terrorist cells. But Ava's role in the operation remained completely invisible officially. The intelligence breakthrough had been attributed to routine NSA communications, intercepts in traditional law enforcement investigation. Her second assignment had been even more challenging. Operating under the identity of a freelance journalist specializing in environmental issues, she had spent 2 years in Southeast Asia, tracking the financial networks that funded illegal logging operations in protected rainforests. The mission had required her to develop relationships with corrupt government officials, international business executives, and criminal organization leaders who would have killed her without hesitation if they had discovered her true purpose. The environmental cover had been perfect for her needs, providing legitimate reasons to travel extensively, ask detailed questions about financial transactions, and maintain contact with sources in multiple countries. She had published articles in respected environmental magazines, spoken at academic conferences, and even won a journalism award for her investigation into palm oil plantation expansion, all while gathering intelligence that eventually led to the disruption of criminal networks operating across 4 countries. But it was her third and most recent assignment that had brought her to Seattle and the carefully constructed identity of a coffee shop worker. For the past 8 months, she had been investigating a security breach that threatened to compromise ongoing naval operations throughout the Pacific region. Someone with access to classified information was selling tactical intelligence to foreign buyers, and traditional counterintelligence methods had failed to identify the source of the leak. The investigation had led to the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, where a significant percentage of the Pacific Fleet's submarine force underwent maintenance and upgrade procedures. The facility processed enormous amounts of classified information daily, from technical specifications for advanced sonar systems to operational schedules for nuclear-powered vessels. Any breach of security at the shipyard could potentially compromise missions involving hundreds of personnel and billions of dollars in military hardware. Ava's mission was to identify and monitor potential sources of the intelligence leak while maintaining a cover identity that would allow her to observe naval personnel during their off-duty hours. The coffee shop position at Riverside Café was perfect for this purpose, providing natural opportunities to interact with sailors, officers, and civilian contractors who worked at the shipyard, while appearing to be nothing more than a friendly service worker. Over the past 4 months, she had been systematically documenting the behavioral patterns, financial situations, and personal relationships of dozens of individuals who had access to the type of classified information that was being sold. She had identified 3 potential suspects, developed detailed psychological profiles of their vulnerabilities and motivations, and begun the delicate process of determining which one was actually responsible for the security breach. The investigation required her to suppress every instinct developed through years of advanced military training. When she observed tactical errors in casual conversations about shipyard security procedures, she had to remain silent instead of offering corrections that would reveal her expertise. When she noticed surveillance techniques being used poorly by visiting investigators, she had to resist the urge to provide guidance that could improve their effectiveness. Most challenging of all, she had to maintain the emotional distance necessary for objective analysis while building genuine relationships with people she was secretly investigating. Some of the naval personnel who had become regular customers at Riverside Café were clearly dedicated professionals who would never betray their country's secrets. Others showed signs of financial stress, personal problems, or ideological conflicts that could potentially make them vulnerable to foreign recruitment. The weight of conducting this investigation while maintaining her cover identity was unlike anything she had experienced in her previous assignments. In Prague and Southeast Asia, her targets had been clearly defined enemies whose activities were unambiguously criminal. Here, she was investigating people who had sworn the same oath of service that she had. People whose dedication to their country was presumably as strong as her own, but the stakes were too high for sentiment or personal relationships to interfere with operational requirements. The intelligence being sold was already putting American military personnel at risk, and every day the investigation continued was another day that critical information could reach hostile foreign governments or terrorist organizations. What Ava didn't know, as she prepared Commander Harrison's double espresso that morning, was that her carefully maintained cover was about to be tested in a way that no amount of training could have prepared her for. The simple chain that hung around her neck, hidden beneath her work clothes and forgotten in the routine of daily life, was about to transform both of their lives in ways that neither of them could have imagined. Living as Ava Sinclair required a level of psychological compartmentalization that went far beyond anything taught in conventional military training. Every morning when she woke up in her modest Fremont apartment, she had to consciously suppress 6 years of ingrained military habits and responses that could instantly expose her carefully constructed identity. Alarm clock that buzzed at 4:45 a.m. triggered an automatic response to spring into action with the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to military discipline. Instead, she forced herself to hit the snooze button twice, stretch languidly, and move through her morning routine with the casual pace of a civilian who had never learned that every second could be tactically significant. The simple act of making coffee in her small kitchen required deliberate inefficiency, using a basic drip machine instead of the precise timing and measurements that had become second nature during years of field operations were properly prepared. Caffeine could mean the difference between alertness and fatal mistakes. Her daily commute to Riverside Café presented a constant series of small challenges that tested her ability to think like someone who had never received counter-surveillance training. Walking the 12 blocks from her apartment, she had to resist the urge to vary her route randomly, check for following vehicles, or position herself tactically at crosswalks and bus stops. Instead, she took the same path every day, listened to music through earbuds like any other young professional, and occasionally stopped to pet dogs or chat with neighbors in ways that would have horrified her former instructors, who had drilled into her that predictable patterns were dangerous vulnerabilities. The physical demands of coffee shop work required their own form of careful calibration. Her body was conditioned for operations that might require running 20 miles with full equipment, swimming in ocean conditions that would challenge Olympic athletes, or maintaining perfect stillness for hours during surveillance operations. Translating that level of fitness into the movements of someone whose most strenuous activity was supposedly weekend hiking meant constantly monitoring her strength, speed, and endurance to avoid appearing superhuman to casual observers when lifting 50-pound bags of coffee beans from delivery trucks. She had to remember to struggle slightly and take breaks that someone with her supposed background would need. When the espresso machine malfunctioned and required mechanical troubleshooting, she had to pretend to consult the manual instead of immediately diagnosing the problem based on her extensive training with complex equipment. When difficult customers became aggressive or threatening, she had to respond with normal civilian anxiety instead of the calm assessment of threat levels and response options that her training had made automatic. The psychological challenge was even more demanding than the physical pretense. Ava had been trained to observe and analyze everything around her, cataloging potential threats, identifying useful intelligence, and maintaining constant awareness of tactical situations. But as a coffee shop worker, excessive observational skills would seem strange and potentially suspicious. She had to learn to appear scattered and unfocused, while actually maintaining the heightened awareness that her mission required. This meant developing an entirely new set of behavioral patterns. Instead of scanning every customer for concealed weapons, signs of deception, or indicators of foreign training, she had to limit her observations to the kind of casual people watching that any service worker might engage in. Instead of memorizing license plate numbers from the parking area outside the cafe, she had to content herself with remembering drink preferences and personal anecdotes that customers shared during small talk. The most exhausting aspect of maintaining her cover was the constant need to suppress her natural problem-solving instincts. During her years of military service, Ava had been valued specifically for her ability to identify inefficiencies, security vulnerabilities, and operational improvements. But as a barista, offering suggestions about cafe security procedures, customer flow optimization, or staff scheduling improvements would draw exactly the kind of attention she needed to avoid when she noticed that the cafe's back entrance was frequently left unlocked during morning deliveries, creating a security risk that any experienced operative would immediately flag. She had to bite her tongue and continue wiping tables when she observed that several regular customers exhibited behavioral patterns consistent with financial stress or emotional instability. Information that could be tactically relevant to her investigation. She had to file it away mentally without taking any obvious investigative action. Social dynamics of civilian employment presented their own unique challenges. Her co-workers at Riverside Café were genuinely friendly people who wanted to know about her life, her goals, and her personal relationships. Carla Montenegro, in particular, had taken a maternal interest in Ava's welfare, frequently asking about her dating life and encouraging her to be more social with people her own age. These conversations required Ava to maintain detailed fictional narratives while appearing naturally spontaneous and emotionally authentic. When Carla asked about her family back in Oregon, Ava had to remember specific details about her supposed parents' divorce, her fictional father's fishing business, and her imaginary mother's health problems. When younger co-workers invited her to after-work social activities, she had to decline in ways that seemed personally motivated rather than operationally necessary. The romantic attention she occasionally received from customers and co-workers was particularly complicated to navigate. Several regular customers had asked her out, and she had to develop polite but firm ways of declining that wouldn't seem suspicious or create awkward situations that might affect her ability to gather intelligence. One of the baristas on the afternoon shift, a graduate student named Derek Kowalski, had been persistently friendly in ways that suggested romantic interest, requiring her to maintain a careful balance between courtesy and distance. Most challenging of all were the moments when her military training directly conflicted with her civilian cover requirements. When a customer accidentally knocked over a display of ceramic mugs, Ava's automatic response was to assess the situation for potential threats, clear escape routes, and injury risks before considering the simple cleanup that the situation actually required. When car alarms went off in the parking area, she had to resist the urge to identify the specific vehicle, potential causes, and tactical significance of the cause of the disturbance. The constant mental effort required to monitor and modify her every reaction was creating a level of psychological fatigue that she had never experienced during actual combat operations. In the field, she could rely on her training and instincts to guide her responses appropriately. Here, she had to consciously evaluate every word, gesture, and facial expression to ensure it matched the personality profile of someone who had never received advanced military training. Sleep became increasingly elusive as her mind struggled to process the accumulated stress of daily deception. She found herself lying awake at night, reviewing conversations and interactions for potential mistakes or inconsistencies that could compromise her mission. The isolation was perhaps the most difficult aspect, having no one with whom she could discuss the challenges of her assignment or seek guidance when civilian situations arose that her training hadn't prepared her to handle. Yet, despite the psychological strain, Ava was making steady progress on her actual mission. The intelligence she was gathering about naval personnel who frequented Riverside Café was building into detailed profiles that would eventually allow her to identify the source of the security breach. Every conversation with off-duty sailors provided additional data points, Every observation of spending patterns or behavioral changes added to her analysis, and every casual interaction brought her closer to completing an assignment that could prevent significant damage to national security. The irony wasn't lost on her that some of the most important work of her military career was being accomplished while she pretended to be completely removed from military life. But the exhaustion of maintaining such an elaborate deception was beginning to take its toll, and she found herself wondering how much longer she could sustain the psychological energy required to be someone she wasn't. The art of appearing competent without revealing expertise had become Ava's most delicate daily performance, requiring split-second decisions about how much knowledge to display in every interaction. Each conversation with naval personnel who visited Riverside Café demanded precise calibration between helpful engagement and suspicious insight, walking a razor-thin line that could expose her mission. With a single misplaced comment or overly informed response. When Lieutenant Tommy Brennan from the Submarine Maintenance Division began discussing technical problems with sonar calibration systems during his morning coffee break, Ava had to resist every instinct to offer solutions based on her extensive knowledge of naval acoustic technology. Instead, she listened with the politely confused expression of someone who found technical discussions interesting but incomprehensible, occasionally asking basic questions that demonstrated civilian curiosity rather than professional understanding. "The whole array keeps throwing false contacts," Brennan complained to his colleague, Petty Officer Lisa Valdez, while Ava prepared their usual orders. "We've run diagnostics 3 times, and the equipment checks out perfect. But something's causing phantom readings that could compromise patrol effectiveness." Ava knew immediately that Brennan was describing a classic problem with hydrophone sensitivity settings that could be resolved by adjusting the baseline frequency filters and recalibrating the signal processing algorithms. The solution would take an experienced technician approximately 40 minutes to implement, and would prevent the kind of false readings that had historically led to tactical errors during submarine operations. But offering such specific guidance would instantly reveal technical knowledge that no civilian coffee shop worker should possess. Instead, she focused on steaming milk for Valdez's cappuccino while making appropriately vague noises of sympathy. "That sounds really frustrating," she said with genuine concern that masked her professional interest in the conversation. "I hope you figure it out soon." The understatement was almost painful. Ava had personally worked on sonar system improvements during a classified assignment involving underwater surveillance technology, and she understood the tactical implications of unreliable acoustic detection far better than either of the personnel discussing the problem. But her cover identity demanded ignorance, forcing her to appear helpfully concerned while suppressing information that could directly improve naval operational effectiveness. Similar challenges arose constantly throughout her shifts at Riverside Café. When Chief Petty Officer Raymond Clark mentioned supply chain delays affecting critical spare parts for nuclear reactor maintenance, Ava had to pretend she didn't understand the strategic implications of extended maintenance schedules on submarine deployment readiness. When Ensign Patricia Molina discussed security protocol changes at the shipyard entrance, Ava listened with casual interest while mentally cataloging information that revealed potential vulnerabilities in access control procedures. The physical aspects of her performance required equally careful management. Her reflexes had been honed through years of combat training that emphasized speed, precision, and tactical awareness in every movement. But civilian life demanded a different kind of physicality, one that appeared natural and unremarkable rather than professionally efficient. When a customer accidentally knocked a full cup of hot coffee toward her during the morning rush, Ava's automatic response was to execute a defensive movement that would minimize injury while maintaining balance and situational awareness. Instead, she forced herself to react with normal civilian surprise, allowing the coffee to splash across her apron while stepping back with the awkward haste of someone who hadn't been trained to handle unexpected physical events. Smoothly, the incident left her with minor burns on her forearm that she treated with basic first aid rather than the advanced field medicine techniques that would have been her natural response. Frank Delacroix insisted she take a 15-minute break to properly clean and bandage the injury, concerned about his employees' welfare in ways that reminded Ava how foreign genuine civilian care felt after years of military environments where injuries were assessed primarily for their impact on mission effectiveness. Her coffee preparation skills presented another constant calibration challenge. Through her various cover identities, Ava had learned to operate sophisticated equipment under pressure, and the relatively simple machinery at Riverside Café should have been effortless to master. But appearing too skilled too quickly would raise questions about where someone from her supposed background had acquired advanced technical abilities. During her first week at the cafe, she had deliberately made small mistakes that any new employee might experience, occasionally pulling espresso shots that were slightly over-order extracted, struggling with the timing required to steam multiple milk preparations simultaneously, and asking Carla for guidance on procedures that she could have performed perfectly from the beginning. Now, after 4 months on the job, she had to maintain a progression of improvement that seemed natural for someone learning through experience rather than applying pre-existing expertise. When busy periods required rapid multitasking, she had to appear focused and efficient without demonstrating the kind of calm precision under pressure that would suggest military training. The intellectual challenges were perhaps the most complex to navigate. Her education at MIT and subsequent military training had developed analytical capabilities that extended far beyond coffee shop requirements. But revealing those abilities would contradict her carefully constructed backstory. When customers made casual references to current events, technology trends, or complex social issues, she had to respond with opinions that reflected her supposed educational background rather than her actual expertise. Derek Kowalski, the graduate student who worked afternoon shifts, often tried to engage her in conversations about political science and international relations subjects where her operational experience provided insights that few academics could match. Instead of discussing the practical realities of intelligence operations or the tactical considerations that shaped foreign policy decisions, she had to offer the kind of thoughtful but limited perspectives that someone with her fictional background might reasonably hold. "I was reading about the latest tensions in the South China Sea," Derek mentioned during a slow afternoon period, clearly hoping to impress her with his knowledge of international affairs. "The whole situation seems like it could escalate pretty quickly if diplomatic channels break down." Ava had personally participated in intelligence-gathering operations related to naval activities in that exact region, understanding the strategic dynamics involved at a level that informed actual military planning. But her response had to reflect civilian awareness, filtered through mainstream media, rather than classified briefings and operational experience. "It does seem pretty tense," she agreed while cleaning espresso equipment. "I hope the politicians can work it out before things get too serious." The carefully neutral response satisfied Derek's desire for intellectual conversation while avoiding any comments that might reveal her sophisticated understanding of maritime territorial disputes, naval force positioning, or the intelligence considerations that influence diplomatic negotiations in disputed waters. Financial management presented its own calibration requirements. Her actual income included military pay that continued under her deep cover status, but her apparent lifestyle had to match the financial limitations of someone earning coffee shop wages. This meant maintaining an apartment that was modest but not suspiciously Spartan, eating meals that appeared budget-conscious without seeming deliberately austere, and making purchasing decisions that reflected reasonable financial priorities for someone in her supposed situation. When coworkers discussed their financial struggles, student loan payments, rent increases, or unexpected expenses that created genuine hardship, Ava had to express appropriate sympathy while contributing to conversations about budgeting strategies and cost-saving measures. She couldn't appear too financially secure without explaining income sources that didn't exist in her cover identity. But she also couldn't claim poverty that might prompt offers of assistance or closer examination of her actual circumstances. The emotional labor of maintaining these multiple layers of deception was accumulating in ways that surprised her. During previous assignments, her cover identities had been temporary constructions designed for specific operational objectives. Here, the extended nature of her mission required her to build genuine relationships with people while systematically deceiving them about fundamental aspects of her identity and background. Every friendly conversation with Carla about weekend plans felt like a betrayal of trust. Every moment of casual banter with regular customers involved lies that became more elaborate with each interaction. Every day of pretending to be someone she wasn't created psychological distance between her authentic self and the role she was required to play, yet the mission continued to demand this careful balance. And Ava understood that her ability to maintain the deception was directly related to her effectiveness in gathering the intelligence that could identify the security breach threatening naval operations. The exhaustion was real, but so was the importance of completing an assignment that could prevent significant damage to national security. The first sign that Ava's carefully maintained cover was beginning to attract unwanted scrutiny came on a Tuesday morning when Commander Harrison arrived at Riverside Café 15 minutes earlier than his usual schedule. Instead of ordering his customary black coffee, he lingered near the pastry display, observing the morning routine with an intensity that immediately triggered Ava's threat assessment protocols. She had noticed subtle changes in several regular customers' behavior over the past 2 weeks, but Commander Harrison's altered pattern was the most concerning. During their previous interactions, he had been friendly but professionally distant, treating her with the same courteous respect he showed all service personnel. Now, however, she detected a different quality in his attention, the focused observation of someone conducting deliberate evaluation rather than casual social interaction. "Good morning, Commander," she said, maintaining her established friendly tone while internally calculating potential responses to various scenarios. "You're here early today. Would you like your usual?" "Actually, I'll try something different," he replied, his eyes scanning the cafe's interior in a pattern that Ava recognized as systematic surveillance. "What would you recommend for someone who usually drinks black coffee but wants to try something new?" The question itself was innocent enough, but the way he asked it, with deliberate eye contact and careful attention to her response, suggested layers of meaning beyond beverage preferences. Ava felt the familiar tension that preceded potentially compromising situations, but she forced herself to respond with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely excited to help a customer explore new options. "Well, if you like the boldness of black coffee, you might enjoy a cortado," she suggested, beginning to prepare the drink while maintaining natural conversation rhythm. "It's espresso with warm milk, so you still get the strong coffee flavor, but with a smoother finish." As she worked, Ava became increasingly aware that Commander Harrison was studying her movements with professional interest. When she measured the espresso and steamed the milk, his attention focused on the precision of her technique. When she handled the equipment, She noticed him observing the confident efficiency that she had been carefully moderating for months. The realization that her performance might be slipping sent alarm signals through her entire operational mindset. Had she become too comfortable in her role? Were the months of careful calibration beginning to erode under the psychological strain of constant deception? She forced herself to slow down slightly, introducing minor hesitations that would suggest normal human uncertainty rather than practiced expertise. "You seem to really know what you're doing with that equipment," Commander Harrison commented as she completed his drink. "Have you been working in coffee shops for a long time?" The question was casual enough to avoid seeming like an interrogation, but Ava detected undertones that suggested more than polite curiosity. She handed him the cortado while formulating a response that would satisfy his inquiry without providing additional information that could be cross-referenced or verified. "Not really," she replied with a self-deprecating smile. "I'm just one of those people who gets obsessive about doing things the right way. When I started here, I watched a lot of online tutorials and practiced until I got it down." It was a reasonable explanation that fit her established personality profile. But Commander Harrison's expression suggested he was processing her answer in ways that went beyond accepting it at face value. He took a sip of the cortado, nodded appreciatively, and left his usual tip, but not before making eye contact. That lasted several seconds longer than social convention required. Interaction left Ava with the unsettling sense that her cover identity was being actively evaluated rather than passively accepted. Over the following days, she noticed similar changes in the behavior of other regular customers who had naval connections. Conversations that had previously been casual and friendly began to include subtle probing questions about her background, her interests, and her knowledge of topics that seemed randomly selected but felt strategically chosen. Lieutenant Brennan, who had previously discussed technical problems openly in her presence, began lowering his voice when sensitive topics arose, as if he had developed concerns about who might be listening. Petty Officer Valdez started asking personal questions about Ava's life in Oregon, with the kind of persistence that suggested genuine curiosity, had been replaced by systematic information gathering. Most concerning was Chief Petty Officer Clark, whose casual mentions of shipyard security procedures had been valuable sources of intelligence for Ava's investigation. During his recent visits, Clark had begun testing her reactions to specific pieces of information, mentioning fictional security protocols to see if she would recognize them as false or respond with knowledge that contradicted her supposed civilian status. "They're implementing new badge scanning procedures at Gate 7, he mentioned during what appeared to be casual conversation with a colleague. "Everyone has to scan twice now, once for entry authorization and once for identity verification." Ava knew that Gate 7 had been permanently closed 6 months ago following a security review, and that the described procedure had never been implemented at any shipyard entrance. Clark's statement was clearly designed to test whether she possessed knowledge about facility operations that would contradict her cover story. She maintained an expression of polite disinterest while internally noting that her investigation was now being investigated by the very people she was supposed to be monitoring. The psychological pressure of operating under increasing scrutiny began affecting aspects of her performance that had previously been automatic. Simple tasks like taking inventory or balancing the cash register required conscious effort to appear naturally competent rather than professionally efficient. Conversations with co-workers became exercises in careful word choice, as she found herself second-guessing every response for potential inconsistencies or revealing details. Derek Kowalski's attempts at friendly conversation had evolved into something that felt more like amateur interrogation. His questions about her educational background had become increasingly specific, asking about professors at the University of Oregon who may or may not have existed, courses that might or might not have been offered, and campus details that could be verified through simple internet research. "I had a friend who went to UO around the same time you would have been there," Derek mentioned during a slow afternoon shift. "Professor Martinez in the sociology department. Did you ever take any of his classes?" Ava had researched the University of Oregon faculty extensively while constructing her cover identity. But Derek's question required her to recall specific details about academic departments and personnel that she had memorized months ago. The mental effort of maintaining fictional memories while suppressing actual experiences was becoming increasingly exhausting. "I don't think so," she replied carefully. "I was more focused on general education requirements and didn't take many sociology courses." It was a safe response that avoided committing to knowledge she might not possess while deflecting further inquiry. But Derek's follow-up question suggested he was building a comprehensive picture of her supposed academic experience that could be cross-referenced and verified in ways that might reveal inconsistencies. Even Frank Delacroix, the cafe owner who had previously shown nothing but paternal concern for her welfare, began asking questions that felt more probing than protective. His inquiries about her long-term career goals and her family situation in Oregon carried undertones that suggested he might be responding to external pressure to gather information about his employees. The cumulative effect of this increased scrutiny was creating operational stress that threatened to compromise her mission effectiveness. Ava found herself spending increasing amounts of mental energy on maintaining her cover identity, while having less cognitive capacity available for the intelligence gathering that was her actual objective. The careful balance she had maintained for months was becoming unsustainable under the weight of constant evaluation and potential exposure. Most troubling was the possibility that her investigation had been detected by the very person she was trying to identify. If the source of the security breach had become aware of her presence and purpose, they might be coordinating countermeasures designed to expose her identity or feed her false information that would lead the investigation away from the actual perpetrator. The paranoia that was an occupational hazard of intelligence work began manifesting in ways that could themselves compromise her operational security. Every casual glance from a customer became potential surveillance. Every variation in routine behavior by naval personnel became evidence of coordinated counterintelligence activity. Every friendly question from coworkers transformed into hostile interrogation designed to reveal her true identity and mission. Ava realized that her situation was approaching a critical threshold where maintaining her cover might become impossible regardless of her skill level or operational experience. The psychological strain of constant deception under increasing scrutiny was creating cracks in her performance that observant individuals were beginning to notice and investigate. The investigation that had begun as a methodical process of identifying security threats was evolving into a race between her ability to complete the mission and the growing likelihood that her identity would be exposed before she could achieve her objectives. Every day brought new challenges to her carefully constructed facade, and every interaction carried the potential to be the mistake that would bring her entire operation crashing down. The morning of October 15th began like any other at Riverside Café, with the familiar rhythm of early customers seeking their caffeine fix before facing another day of work. Ava had arrived at her usual time, completed the opening procedures with practiced efficiency, and was preparing for the morning rush when Commander Harrison entered the cafe with an expression that immediately set her internal alarm systems into high alert. Unlike his recent visits where subtle observation had been masked by casual conversation, Today, Commander Harrison carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone conducting official business. He was accompanied by a woman Ava didn't recognize mid-40s, professional attire, and the kind of controlled alertness that suggested law enforcement or intelligence background. They chose a table near the back of the cafe rather than approaching the counter, a positioning choice that provided clear sightlines to all entrances while maintaining conversational privacy. Ava continued her opening routine while covertly observing the pair through her peripheral vision. The woman was conducting what appeared to be a briefing, showing Commander Harrison documents that she kept carefully angled away from other customers' view. Their body language suggested serious discussion of sensitive matters, and several times both of them glanced in Ava's direction, with the kind of focused attention that confirmed her growing suspicions about increased scrutiny. The morning rush proceeded, normally until approximately 8:30 a.m., when a series of small incidents began cascading into the exposure that Ava had been dreading for weeks. The first trigger came when Derek Kowalski arrived for his shift 30 minutes early, claiming he needed to discuss scheduling changes with Carla Montenegro. But instead of seeking out their supervisor, Derek positioned himself behind the counter where he could observe Ava's interactions with customers. While pretending to organize supplies, the second warning sign appeared when Chief Petty Officer Clark entered the cafe accompanied by two other naval personnel, whom Ava recognized as part of the shipyard's security division. Instead of their usual casual conversation about technical matters, the three men spoke in hushed tones while maintaining obvious surveillance of her activities. Their behavior was so conspicuously official that other customers began noticing the unusual atmosphere, but it was the arrival of Lieutenant Brennan that confirmed Ava's worst fears about her operational security. Instead of ordering his usual coffee and engaging in friendly small talk, Brennan approached the counter with the systematic demeanor of someone executing a planned operation. He requested a large coffee with specific preparation instructions that required Ava to turn away from the main seating area for approximately 90 seconds, exactly long enough for coordinated movement by the other personnel who were obviously conducting surveillance. When she turned back to hand Brennan his coffee, Ava realized that the spacing and positioning of every naval person in the cafe had shifted into a pattern that effectively controlled all exit routes while maintaining plausible deniability about their actual purpose. Her years of tactical training allowed her to instantly recognize the setup as a soft containment operation designed to prevent escape while avoiding the appearance of hostile action. The psychological pressure of operating under such obvious scrutiny finally overwhelmed the careful emotional control that had sustained her cover identity for months. As she reached across the counter to hand Lieutenant Brennan his coffee, her hand trembled slightly, a physiological response to stress that she had been trained to suppress but could no longer manage under the accumulated strain of constant deception and mounting investigation. Tremor caused her to misjudge the handoff distance, and the large cup of hot coffee slipped from her grasp, splashing across the counter and onto both herself and Lieutenant Brennan. The accident triggered her automatic emergency response protocols, causing her to step backward while simultaneously assessing the incident for tactical implications and potential injury assessment reactions that were far too controlled and systematic for someone experiencing a normal civilian accident. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, grabbing towels to begin cleanup while forcing her voice to carry the appropriate level of civilian distress. "Are you burned? Do you need medical attention?" But the damage to her cover extended beyond spilled coffee. The accident had caused her to move quickly and efficiently in ways that revealed physical conditioning situational awareness that contradicted her supposed background. More critically, the stress of the situation had caused her to unconsciously adjust her posture into a defensive stance that any trained military observer would immediately recognize as combat-ready. Positioning. Lieutenant Brennan assured her that he wasn't injured while studying her response to the incident with obvious professional interest. "No harm done," he said calmly. "Accidents happen. But you handled that really well. Most people would have panicked more." The comment was clearly designed to elicit a response that might reveal additional inconsistencies in her behavior. But Ava was too focused on the immediate crisis to carefully calibrate her reply. "I guess I just don't panic easily," she said while continuing to clean up the spill. "My dad always said that staying calm was the best way to handle emergencies." It was a reasonable explanation that fitted her established backstory. But Commander Harrison had moved closer to the counter during the cleanup process, and his proximity allowed him to observe details that no casual customer should have been analyzing. When Ava bent down to retrieve towels that had fallen behind the counter, the chain around her neck shifted position beneath her work shirt, creating a subtle outline that became visible through the fabric. The chain itself wouldn't have been remarkable. Many people wore jewelry that remained hidden during work hours. But Commander Harrison's trained eye detected something about the shape and weight of whatever hung from that chain that triggered recognition based on his extensive military experience. His expression changed from casual observation to focused attention as he processed the implications of what he was seeing. "Ava," he said quietly, using her first name with an informality that had never characterized their previous interactions. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" The request sent immediate alarm signals through her operational awareness. Speaking privately with Commander Harrison would remove her from the relative safety of public observation while potentially exposing her to direct questioning that could completely compromise her mission. But refusing such a reasonable request from a regular customer would itself seem suspicious and might precipitate the exact confrontation she was trying to avoid. "I should probably finish cleaning this up first," she replied, buying time to assess her options while continuing to wipe down surfaces that were already clean. "Maybe after the morning rush dies down?" Commander Harrison glanced around the cafe, noting the positions of the other naval personnel who were maintaining their surveillance pattern while pretending to engage in normal customer activities. "I think it would be better if we talked now," he said with gentle but unmistakable insistence. "It won't take long." The tone of his voice carried authority that was impossible to ignore without creating an obvious scene that would draw attention from other customers and potentially escalate the situation beyond her ability to control. Ava realized that her months of careful deception were approaching their inevitable conclusion, and that any further attempts to maintain her cover identity would only make the eventual revelation more problematic for everyone involved. "Okay," she said, untying her apron with hands that she forced to remain steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Carla, I need to take a quick break." Her supervisor nodded from across the cafe, apparently unaware of the significance of the interaction taking place at the counter. Commander Harrison gestured toward the small office area behind the main seating section, a location that would provide privacy while keeping them within the sight of his colleagues who were maintaining their discreet surveillance positions. As they walked toward the back of the cafe, Ava felt the weight of the chain around her neck with sudden, acute awareness. The dog tags that she had worn continuously for 6 years, a personal reminder of her service and sacrifice that she had never been able to completely abandon, were about to expose everything she had worked so carefully to conceal. The breaking point that she had been unconsciously anticipating for weeks was finally arriving, and there was no tactical response that could prevent the collision between her carefully constructed civilian identity and the military reality that defined her true self. Commander Harrison had seen something that confirmed suspicions that had obviously been building for some time. And the investigation was about to shift from covert observation to direct confrontation, in less than 60 seconds. The coffee shop worker named Ava Sinclair was going to cease to exist, replaced by whatever remained of Lieutenant Ava. Catherine Sinclair, once the truth finally emerged from months of careful concealment. The small office behind Riverside Café felt impossibly cramped as Commander Harrison closed the door behind them. The casual sounds of morning coffee service now muffled to a distant hum that seemed to belong to another world entirely. Ava stood with her back to the desk, acutely aware that her carefully maintained cover was about to undergo scrutiny that months of preparation might not have adequately anticipated. Commander Harrison didn't speak immediately. Instead, he studied her with the methodical assessment of someone confirming suspicions that had been developing over time rather than reacting to sudden revelation. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of unspoken recognition and the knowledge that their previous interactions had been founded on deceptions that were no longer sustainable. 6 years ago, Commander Harrison began quietly. I had the privilege of working with a joint task force that included some of the Navy's most classified operations. The personnel files for those missions were so highly classified that most of the participants' identities remained unknown even to other team members. Ava remained motionless, her training keeping her expression neutral while her mind raced through potential responses to various directions this conversation might take. Commander Harrison's tone suggested knowledge rather than suspicion, implying that her exposure might be more complete than she had feared. But there was one operation, he continued, involving intelligence gathering in Southeast Asia, where the mission reports mentioned a female operative whose work was so exceptional that it prevented a significant terrorist attack on American personnel. The reports never included names or photographs, but they described someone with a very specific skill set and operational background. The reference to Southeast Asia confirmed Ava's growing realization that Commander Harrison possessed information about her actual service record that should have been impossible for him to access. The operation he was describing had been one of her most successful assignments, but it had been classified at levels that required extraordinary clearance to review. The operative in question, Commander Harrison said, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance, was noted for exceptional adaptability, advanced technical skills, and the ability to maintain deep cover identities for extended periods. The mission reports also mentioned that she had a distinctive scar along her left temple, received during a training accident early in her career. Ava's hand unconsciously moved toward the concealer-covered mark that she had been explaining away as a childhood bicycle accident for months. The specific detail confirmed that Commander Harrison had access to information that went far beyond casual observation or routine background checking. "Commander," she said carefully, "I'm not sure what you're suggesting, but I think there might be some confusion about who you think I am." It was a final attempt to maintain operational security. But even as she spoke, Ava recognized the futility of continued deception. Commander Harrison's knowledge was too specific and too accurate to be deflected by further lies. And persisting with her cover story would only demonstrate disrespect for his intelligence and military experience. "The confusion," Commander Harrison replied gently, "is why someone with your background and capabilities is working in a coffee shop while conducting what appears to be surveillance on naval personnel who frequent this establishment." The directness of his statement eliminated any remaining pretense between them. He had identified not only her military background, but also her current operational purpose, suggesting a level of awareness that extended far beyond accidental recognition. "You've been watching me," Ava said, making it a statement rather than a question. "We've been watching each other," Commander Harrison corrected. The difference is that I know why I'm watching you. But I'm still trying to understand why you're watching us." The admission that his surveillance had been deliberate and coordinated reframed their entire interaction history. Every casual conversation, every friendly exchange, every moment of apparent normalcy had been conducted under layers of mutual deception that neither of them had acknowledged until now. "I can't discuss operational details," Ava said, falling back on standard protocols for maintaining mission security even after exposure. "You understand that, I'm sure." "I understand operational security," Commander Harrison agreed. "But I also understand that your mission and mine might be more closely related than either of us initially realized." The implication that he was also conducting some form of investigation sent new alarm signals through Ava's tactical assessment. If Commander Harrison was involved in counterintelligence operations, her exposure might represent not just personal compromise, but potential mission failure that could affect ongoing national security interests. "What exactly is your mission?" she asked, recognizing that continued deflection would be counterproductive given the level of mutual exposure that had already occurred. "Commander." Harrison moved to the small window that overlooked the cafe's main seating area, where the naval personnel who had been maintaining surveillance were still positioned at their respective tables. 3 months ago, we identified communications intercepts suggesting that classified information about submarine operations was being sold to foreign buyers. The investigation led us to personnel who frequent civilian establishments near the shipyard. The revelation that Commander Harrison was investigating the same security breach that had brought her to Seattle created a complex tactical situation that her training had never specifically addressed. 2 separate intelligence operations had been running parallel investigations of the same target, creating the exact kind of operational overlap that classification protocols were designed to prevent. "You thought I was the leak," Ava said, understanding now why her behavior had attracted such systematic scrutiny from multiple naval personnel. "Your operational skills were too advanced to ignore," Commander Harrison explained. "Someone with your capabilities could easily extract classified information from unsuspecting personnel, and your cover identity was sophisticated enough to suggest professional intelligence training." The irony of the situation was almost overwhelming. While Ava had been investigating naval personnel for signs of security breaches, those same personnel had been investigating her as a potential foreign operative. Both investigations had been operating under legitimate security concerns, but their mutual deception had created a situation where the actual perpetrator might have escaped detection while resources were focused on eliminating false leads. "The real question," Commander Harrison continued, "is whether we can coordinate our efforts instead of working against each other." The suggestion of cooperation represented a dramatic shift from individual mission parameters to joint operations. That would require approval from multiple levels of command authority, but it also offered the possibility of combining resources and information that might accelerate the identification of the actual security threat. That would require disclosure of classified information that I'm not authorized to share, Ava pointed out, even as she recognized the logical advantages of coordinated investigation. It would also require trust between 2 people who have been systematically deceiving each other for months, Commander Harrison added. But the alternative is continuing to waste resources on mutual surveillance, while the real perpetrator continues compromising operational security. Through the office window, Ava could see Derek Kowalski cleaning tables with unusual attention to areas near where the naval personnel were seated, his positioning allowing him to overhear conversations that he would normally have no reason to monitor. The observation triggered a new line of analysis that hadn't occurred to her during months of focusing on obvious naval targets. "Commander," she said slowly. "Has your investigation considered civilian personnel who might have access to classified conversations through proximity rather than direct security clearance?" The question shifted their dynamic from confrontation to collaboration as both of them began processing the implications of overlooking potential threats that operated outside traditional security frameworks. The reckoning that had begun as mutual exposure was evolving into tactical cooperation that might finally identify the source of the security breach they had both been working to eliminate. Within 30 minutes of their confrontation in the cafe's back office, Ava found herself in a secure conference room at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, surrounded by personnel whose security, clearances, and operational authority dwarfed anything she had encountered during her previous assignments. The transition from coffee shop worker to participating member of a joint intelligence operation had occurred with a speed that left her struggling to process the full implications of what was unfolding. Admiral Patricia Hawthorne, commanding officer of Naval Intelligence Pacific Northwest Division, sat at the head of a polished conference table that held more classified documents than Ava had seen assembled in one location during her entire military career. Flanking the admiral were representatives from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and what appeared to be senior officials from the National Security Agency, whose presence suggested the security breach had implications extending far beyond regional naval operations. "Lieutenant Sinclair," Admiral Hawthorne began, using Ava's actual rank for the first time in months, "your assignment to investigate potential security breaches at this facility was coordinated through channels that deliberately excluded local command authority. We were not informed of your presence or mission parameters until Commander Harrison's report this morning. The revelation that her superiors had conducted the deep water operation without informing the very people whose facility she was investigating created a new understanding of the political and security complexities surrounding her mission." Admiral Hawthorne's tone suggested professional frustration with the operational secrecy that had prevented coordination between agencies working toward identical objectives. Agent Rebecca Walsh from the FBI's Seattle office spread a series of surveillance photographs across the conference table, each image showing different naval personnel in casual settings around the city. "For the past 8 months, we've been conducting our own investigation into the intelligence leak, focusing on traditional security vulnerabilities, personnel with financial problems, romantic entanglements with foreign nationals, or ideological conflicts that might motivate betrayal." The photographs included several individuals whom Ava had been monitoring during her time at Riverside Café, confirming that multiple investigations had been pursuing overlapping target lists without coordination or information sharing. The waste of resources was significant, but more troubling was the possibility that their parallel efforts had created operational blind spots that allowed the actual perpetrator to continue undetected. Commander Harrison activated a economical wall-mounted display that showed a complex network analysis diagram connecting dozens of individuals through various relationship and communication patterns. "The breakthrough came when we started analyzing metadata from communications intercepts rather than focusing on the content of specific conversations." The diagram revealed communication patterns that Ava hadn't detected during her ground-level surveillance, primarily because her position at the coffee shop provided access to verbal conversations, but not electronic communications. The visual representation showed data flows that suggested coordinated information sharing between multiple sources, indicating a more sophisticated operation than a single individual selling classified information opportunistically. "Derek Kowalski," announced Dr. Sarah Chen from the NSA's Technical Analysis Division, highlighting one name on the network diagram, has been systematically documenting conversations that occur in public spaces near the shipyard. His graduate research on social network analysis provided perfect cover for collecting and organizing intelligence that would be extremely valuable to foreign buyers. The identification of Derek as the primary suspect recontextualized months of interactions that Ava had interpreted as romantic interest and intellectual curiosity. His persistent questions about her background hadn't been attempts at personal connection. They had been professional intelligence gathering designed to assess whether she represented a threat to his operation. Kowalski's academic position gave him legitimate reasons to study social interaction patterns, while his employment at Riverside Café provided access to off-duty conversations between naval personnel. Agent Walsh continued. He was essentially conducting ethnographic research that happened to produce actionable intelligence about classified military operations. Admiral Hawthorne pulled up additional documents that showed the scope of information that had been compromised through Derek's systematic eavesdropping and social network analysis. Submarine deployment schedules, maintenance windows, personnel rotations, technical specifications for sonar equipment, all information that was discussed casually in civilian settings by personnel who had no reason to suspect. Surveillance. The sophistication of Derek's operation became clear as the briefing continued. Rather than attempting to recruit military sources or hack secure systems, he had identified the security vulnerability created by human nature, the tendency for service members to discuss work-related stress and technical challenges during off-duty social interactions. His graduate advisor, Professor Marcus Kellerman at the University of Washington, has been providing academic legitimacy for research that was actually intelligence collection, Dr. Chun explained. Kellerman has connections to foreign academic institutions that have been identified as fronts for intelligence services. The revelation that Derek's operation extended into academic networks explained how raw intelligence gathered at the coffee shop was being processed, analyzed, and transmitted to foreign buyers. The university connection provided both intellectual framework for the zone framework for the collection activities and secure channels for delivering information to end users. Commander Harrison highlighted specific entries in communication logs that showed the timeline of information transfer from casual conversations to foreign intelligence services. Naval personnel would discuss operational challenges over coffee in the morning. By evening, summaries of those conversations were being transmitted through encrypted academic collaboration networks to recipients in 3 different countries. The efficiency of the operation was remarkable and disturbing. Derek had essentially weaponized a natural human tendency to seek social connection and professional support, turning Riverside Café into an intelligence collection platform that operated in plain sight without triggering traditional security monitoring. The investigation stalled, admitted Agent Walsh, because we were looking for traditional espionage indicators, financial irregularities, suspicious contacts, or unusual access to classified systems. Derek's operation didn't fit conventional patterns because it relied on public information that technically wasn't classified when individuals chose to discuss it in civilian settings. Ava understood now why her own investigation had focused on the wrong targets. She had been analyzing naval personnel for signs of intentional betrayal while the actual security breach was being conducted by someone who had no official access to classified information but unlimited access to the people who did. Your presence at the cafe, Admiral Hawthorne told Ava, created operational pressure that forced Derek to accelerate his timeline and take risks that ultimately exposed his activities. His attempts to gather information about your background led him to make inquiries that triggered counter-surveillance protocols. The irony was that Derek's investigation of her had been more thorough and systematic than her investigation of him. While she had dismissed him as an overly friendly co-worker with romantic interests, he had been conducting professional intelligence assessment to determine whether she represented a threat to his operation. The scope of compromised information, Dr. Chun announced grimly, includes intelligence that has already been used to target American naval operations in the Pacific. At least 2 submarine patrols have encountered unexplained detection by foreign vessels that suggest their operational parameters were known in advance. The real-world consequences of Derek's intelligence collection had moved beyond theoretical security concerns to actual operational compromises that had put American military personnel at risk. The stakes involved went far beyond the academic exercise that Derek's research appeared to represent. Coordinated arrests are scheduled to begin in 45 minutes, Agent Walsh announced, checking her secure communication device. Derek Kowalski, Professor Kellerman, and 7 other individuals connected to the network will be taken into custody simultaneously across 3 states. The magnitude of the operation that had grown from casual eavesdropping in a coffee shop to an international intelligence network demonstrated how modern espionage had evolved beyond traditional models of recruitment and technological infiltration. The most effective intelligence operations, as Derek had proven, exploited human psychology and social dynamics rather than computer systems or institutional vulnerabilities. As the briefing concluded and personnel began coordinating arrest procedures, Ava realized that her months of careful deception and systematic investigation had contributed to dismantling a security threat that neither traditional counterintelligence methods nor advanced technological monitoring had been able to detect. Independently, the arrests at Riverside Café unfolded with the precise coordination that characterized successful intelligence operations. But for Ava, watching from the secure observation post established across the street, the experience felt surreal after months of intimate familiarity with the location and its daily rhythms. Federal agents moved through the coffee shop with professional efficiency, securing evidence and detaining Derek Kowalski with minimal disruption to the morning customers who had no idea they had been unwitting participants in an international espionage operation. Frank Delacroix stood behind the counter with obvious confusion and distress as investigators explained that his trusted employee had been conducting systematic surveillance of naval personnel. Carla Montenegro answered questions with the bewildered cooperation of someone discovering that her workplace had been the center of activities she could never have imagined. The genuine shock and concern displayed by her former co-workers reinforced Ava's understanding of how effectively Derek had concealed his true purposes behind the facade of academic research and casual employment. 3 hours after the coordinated arrests, Admiral Hawthorne requested a private meeting with Ava in her secure office overlooking Elliott Bay. The view through the large windows showed naval vessels moving through the harbor with the same routine purpose that had characterized Ava's daily observations during her undercover assignment. But everything about her relationship to that world had fundamentally changed. "Lieutenant Sinclair," Admiral Hawthorne began, settling into her chair with the authoritative presence that had made her one of the Navy's most respected intelligence commanders. "Your performance during Operation Silent Harbor exceeded expectations that were already quite high based on your previous service record." The operation's code name was the first indication Ava had received that her assignment had been part of a larger, strategic initiative involving multiple agencies and extending far beyond the regional security concerns that had initially motivated her deployment to Seattle. Admiral Hawthorne's use of formal recognition suggested that the mission's conclusion marked a significant transition in her career trajectory. Your ability to maintain operational security while conducting effective intelligence gathering under increasingly difficult circumstances demonstrated exactly the kind of adaptability and professional judgment that makes deep-water operatives uniquely valuable to national security interests. The Admiral continued, opening a folder that contained documents bearing classification levels that Ava had rarely encountered. The commendation letter that Admiral Hawthorne placed on the desk represented formal acknowledgement of achievements that had remained completely invisible for months. Reading her actual accomplishments described in official language felt like reconnecting with an identity that had been suppressed so completely that she had begun to forget who she really was beneath the carefully constructed civilian persona. More importantly, Admiral Hawthorne said, your investigation identified a completely new category of security vulnerability that traditional counterintelligence methods had failed to detect. Derek Kowalski's social network analysis approach represents a significant evolution in espionage methodology that requires corresponding evolution in our defensive strategies. The recognition that her work had contributed to understanding emerging threats rather than simply resolving existing problems elevated the mission's significance beyond personal achievement to institutional learning that would influence future security protocols. Admiral Hawthorne was essentially acknowledging that Ava's months of deception and careful observation had produced insights that would protect other military personnel from similar vulnerabilities. The question now, Admiral Hawthorne continued, is how best to utilize your unique experience and demonstrated capabilities for ongoing national security objectives. The transition from mission completion to future assignment represented the kind of career moment that defined long-term professional trajectory. Ava understood that Admiral Hawthorne was offering opportunities that would shape not only her immediate future, but her entire remaining military career. The Deep Water program is expanding to address the kind of non-traditional intelligence threats that Derek Kowalski's operation represents, Admiral Hawthorne explained. We need operatives who can identify and infiltrate civilian networks that pose security risks in military operations without fitting conventional espionage patterns. The offer represented a chance to continue using her most specialized skills in service of evolving national security challenges. After months of suppressing her abilities and pretending to be someone ordinary, the prospect of openly utilizing her training and experience felt like emerging from psychological imprisonment. Additionally, Admiral Hawthorne said, retrieving another set of documents from her secure files, the Joint Intelligence Community has requested that you consider a position with the newly established Civilian Interface Analysis Division. Your experience at Riverside Café demonstrated unprecedented effectiveness in gathering intelligence from public interactions between military personnel and civilian populations. The second opportunity offered a chance to develop entirely new approaches to intelligence gathering based on the techniques she had inadvertently pioneered during her coffee shop assignment. Rather than simply returning to previous operational patterns, she would be creating frameworks for future operations that address security vulnerabilities that had never been systematically analyzed. Both positions, Admiral Hawthorne noted, would allow you to operate under your actual identity while utilizing the complete range of your training and experience. No more pretending to be someone you're not. The promise of authentic professional identity represented the resolution of psychological conflicts that had made the undercover assignment increasingly difficult to sustain. After months of careful deception, the prospect of being recognized for her actual capabilities while serving her country's interests felt like the restoration of personal integrity that had been temporarily sacrificed for operational necessity. There's also a personal consideration, Admiral Hawthorne added with a slight smile. Commander Harrison has requested permission to work with you on developing new training protocols for identifying civilian-based intelligence threats. He was quite impressed by your operational capabilities once he understood who you really were. The mention of Commander Harrison created unexpected emotional complexity that Ava hadn't anticipated. Their relationship had been founded on mutual deception, but their eventual cooperation had demonstrated professional compatibility that might translate into productive long-term collaboration. The possibility of working with someone who understood both her capabilities and the psychological challenges of deep cover operations held significant appeal. "I need to ask," Ava said, "what happens to my cover identity?" Ava Sinclair from Oregon technically doesn't exist anymore. Admiral Hawthorne nodded understandingly. "The identity has been retired with full documentation for your records. Your service as a barista will be noted in your personnel file as specialized assignment completion. And if anyone from Riverside Café asks about your disappearance, they'll be told you received a federal employment opportunity that required immediate relocation." The practical resolution of her fictional background felt like closing the chapter that had demanded extraordinary personal sacrifice while producing significant professional achievement. Ava Sinclair, the coffee shop worker, would fade into memory, but Lieutenant Ava Catherine Sinclair would continue serving her country with enhanced understanding of modern security challenges. "I accept both positions," Ava said firmly, "with the understanding that I'll be developing new operational protocols rather than simply implementing existing procedures." Admiral Hawthorne's expression showed satisfaction that suggested Ava's response had been both expected and desired. "Excellent. Your transition to authentic military service begins immediately, and your first briefing with the Civilian Interface Analysis Division is scheduled for tomorrow morning." As Ava left Admiral Hawthorne's office and walked through the naval facility wearing her actual uniform for the first time in months, she felt the profound relief of no longer needing to monitor every word, gesture, and expression for consistency with a fictional identity. The extraordinary skills that had defined her military career could finally be used openly in service of missions that utilized her complete capabilities. Coffee shop worker who had served black coffee to unsuspecting naval personnel was gone forever, replaced by a military intelligence specialist whose unique experience would help protect American interests against threats that traditional security methods had never been designed to address. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.